Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So today on our agenda for new agent training, we're going to be discussing a couple of topics. One is flood zones and why flood zones attract investors. We're also going to be going over the broker clauses that are available on ZipForms for you to use for your convenience, so that you're not having to write your own language into contracts. That is probably one of the most intimidating parts of practicing real estate when you're new, is trying to figure out how to word things in the additional financing terms section or in the additional terms section. So we're going to go over how to access those and when to use them. And then lastly, we're going to have our Get Business Quick idea, and then we're going to have some time for some questions and answering opportunities. So I wish you good morning, and we're going to get started. So have you ever been looking at real estate, and when you're looking in an area of town where most of the homes are in the flood zone, you notice that those homes more and more over the years, over the past 15, 20 years, have become rental properties. You'll see that's very common in flood zone areas. They, at first blush, it might seem that the reason why that is because they flood frequently and homeowners get tired of it and just sell cheap and get out of there. That's not actually what's going on. A lot of those homes never actually suffer any flood damage. They just happen to be mapped by FEMA in a flood zone area. And therefore, if a mortgage is going to be held on the property, the mortgage company is going to require flood insurance to be in place in order to protect the home buyer and the mortgage company. So you think about it this way. A homeowner lives there for 20 years. Flood insurance was very small 20 years ago. Occurrences of devastating flood damage across the coastlines on either side of the country were not as bad as they are now. Now we see flood occurrences in flood-prone areas like the coasts happening all the time. Well, the insurance companies, of course, have to pass on that loss and they try to spread it across all of the premium payers. So all of the insurance customers feel that hurt. So over 20 years, we've seen flood insurance rates going up and up and up. Now, another important point here is that flood insurance is similar to car insurance in that it is not the same for everyone. So just like when you call to get car insurance, I may get a different rate quote than someone else may get because it depends on my borrowing ability, my credit score, how old I am, how long I've been a driver. I mean, there are a lot of things that are taken into account when they're quoting car insurance, and flood insurance is the same. It has to do with the property. It has to do with the customer's credit rating. It has to do with the customer's past bankruptcies. It has a lot to do with the person, not just the property. So because of that, I want to caution you to never give sort of general ideas to a buyer about what it would be. So if you've got a listing and there is flood insurance in place on that listing and it's $400 a year or it's $100 a month, I would caution you to be careful about quoting that to a buyer's agent, or at least make sure you are phrasing it that the seller has told me that they pay $120 a month in flood insurance, and they graciously provided me the insurance agent's contact information. So I would encourage you and your buyer to call and try to get a quote on this property prior to writing the contract. Now that is my philosophy, that I feel like my best business practice will be to get in front of the flood insurance conversation before we're under contract, rather than getting under contract and the buyer 3 weeks later or a week prior to closing finds out that flood insurance is going to be another $300 a month. And then all of a sudden their financing can't go through. So for me, I tend to practice business that I would rather get in front of the problem or the issue or the pain point that's going to be on the transaction. Because a lot of times they won't make an offer. And what I'll say is that the reason why the buyer may not make an offer is maybe they love the house at $120,000 and they would love to live there. And let's say their monthly mortgage payment is going to be, $900. Great. Well, if there's going to be $300 a month in flood insurance required, then they're now making a $1,200 payment. Let's say they can make a $1,200 payment. If they can make a $1,200 payment, why are they going to buy that house and have $300 of it be flood insurance when they could go look elsewhere and perhaps buy more house for a $1,200 a month payment? So what ends up happening is the homes in these areas that have flood insurance required, that has slowly crept up over the years to these very expensive monthly premiums, is that buyers who potentially would love to buy that house end up buying a different house for more money. They can now go buy a $150,000 house somewhere else and perhaps also get a garage or get an extra bedroom or have a half of an acre and spend that extra $300 a month on more house rather than spending it on flood insurance. Is that clear? Does that make sense? Jennifer, I know this makes sense to you because we've talked about it before, but those of you who are new, does that make sense that the mortgage company is going to require you to buy flood insurance? And if you're going to have an outlay of $300 extra cash every month, you might as well go buy a more expensive house somewhere else or go buy a $120,000 house that's not in a flood zone.
I got a question.
Please, Deepak.
If I know that's only a mortgage, if you were getting a mortgage, but if you were paying a cash for the house, and do you still have to pay the mortgage? I mean, the flood insurance, even, is it something that you have to pay?
That would be your choice. So if you're purchasing the home cash, right, it would be your choice as to whether you wanted to hold flood insurance on that property or not. And I would say that would be a very property specific choice. Right. So the simple fact that a home is in the FEMA flood zone does not necessarily mean it floods often.
Right.
Right. So that would be a decision the homeowner would make themselves as to whether they wanted to protect themselves in that way or not.
Okay. And as far as the mortgage is concerned, that buyer has to be qualified and approved to be able to carry that extra $300 for mortgage insurance. And I've seen in the past where the mortgage insurance was so high that it actually did knock them out of qualifying for their loan.
And same for
that property. So that's, I think, what you're talking about there. That if they can qualify for a $1,200 payment, why are they buying a house that's lesser?
And if they can qualify to pay $1,200 a month, maybe they only want to pay $900 a month, and that's why they're shopping for a $120,000 house. However, it defeats the purpose of staying within the budget if you're adding $300 for flood insurance. Right. So that's how we find that these properties more and more over the years become investment properties. Cash buyers buy them, cash investors buy them, and then they rent them out. And it's not so much about they flood all the time as it is about no one wants to carry that flood insurance expense. So unfortunately, some very lovely areas in the Roanoke Valley are becoming more and more rental units. And hopefully the renters are taking out some sort of insurance, renter's insurance that would insure them in case a flood occurrence happened. But I will say this, if you are considering purchasing a property in a flood insurance area, the homeowner's insurance company that your buyer is going to use can pull the records on that house and can look and see if there have been any insurance claims on that property. Same as they can pull the insurance information on a property to see if there's ever been any insurance claims, hail damage to a roof, a fire in the home, and flooding. And that is, of course, only if homeowner's insurance was called in to remedy the situation. So this is why we find that in flood zones, they increasingly more and more are rental properties and become investment areas. The other thing, I'll add to this is the flood insurance cap exists. Congress keeps a flood insurance premium cap in place so that flood insurance carriers have a cap on what they can charge. And I admit I do not know what goes into the algorithm of figuring out where that, how they calculate how much they're going to charge for flood insurance premiums. However, they can't go above that cap rate for that area. So Congress, unfortunately, has only been doing extensions on the flood cap rate. And so those have been 30 days, 60 days, 90 days if we're lucky. I'll tell you that you're going to start hearing the term RPAC pretty often now that you're a real estate agent. And RPAC is the Realtors Political Action Committee. And that is a National Association of Realtors committee that has committed itself to using the donations from the realtors to lobby. And one of the things they lobby for is to make sure that flood insurance premium cap never expires. If it expires, then insurance companies can charge whatever they want to charge for flood insurance. And if that happens, then those homeowners who have a property that has flood insurance on it, that is a contingency of their mortgage, then if they're unable to make their monthly payment because they now can't pay $600 a month in flood insurance, then that note's going to be called due by the mortgage company. They're going to get foreclosed on. And that's going to be because the flood insurance premium cap got or expired, or Congress let it expire. So RPAC has been very instrumental in making sure that never falls by the wayside. I think they would very much like to see Congress pass something more than a 30 or 60 day extension. But in this case, we're just happy it's not expiring. So that's one of the many ways that RPAC uses our contributions. I do donate to RPAC every year. They also work hard. They are bipartisan, so they are only about what's good for real estate. You know, I have a feeling they'll have a huge opinion about this new adverse market penalty fee that Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae are putting on all refinances, because that's going to unduly hurt homeowners who are hoping to refinance their home. So I have a feeling they'll have something, to say about that as well. We haven't heard yet, but just keep that in mind, that when you are doing your annual dues to RVAR, to the Roanoke Valley Association of Realtors, you'll see an optional RPAC donation there. I would encourage you to educate yourself on what RPAC is and encourage you to give. So it does help our industry. It helps us stay strong in our industry and protects our livelihood. So I'll get off my soapbox about RPAC now. And we'll move on to, first, let me ask any other questions about flood zones, flood insurance premiums. We did have one, I will tell you one cautionary tale while you can unmute yourself if you have something to add. Poor agent of ours. They were the listing agent. They were representing the seller. The seller had flood insurance on their property. As an incentive to get the buyer to commit to a contract, the seller and the listing agent decided to offer 1 year flood insurance premium for the buyer. Well, they did not call me. Remember, call me. If it's weird, call me. If you've never done it before, call me, please. Because what happened was they simply stated that they would pay the 1 year premium. Well, the listing agent and the seller did not realize what I have just told you, and it's that not everyone is equal in the premium game. So where this seller had owned the property for a long, long time, and the seller had been paying, I don't know, I'm going to make this up, $150 a month for flood insurance, okay? So yes, the seller was perfectly happy to offer 1 year premium for flood insurance. However, the buyer qualified for a much higher monthly premium rate. So the way it was written in the contract, it didn't matter what that premium was. So the seller and the agent ended up splitting the cost on that, because the agent realized that they had participated in maybe not doing as much research as they should have done. And I would have done the same thing, honestly. And I'm certainly here to tell you that I have made mistakes like that too. You will famously hear me talk about how I own half of a pool heater in Southwest Roanoke County. So we all make mistakes like that. So the lesson is, if it is weird or you have never done it before, call me. Because what we could have done is we could have added in some language there before it was ratified to say not to exceed, you know, X dollars, $2,000 or whatever we wanted to put in there. Okay. Any questions about that? Anybody have anything to add about flood insurance? Okay, classes are going quick this morning. Sorry, y'all. So let's talk about broker clauses on ZipForms. These are just a sort of concierge service we're offering you guys because I want to make sure you are writing things correctly. I want to make sure that you are clear and concise in your language so that everyone's expectations are going to be met with these clauses that we're putting into contracts. So I'm going to share my screen now. And we're going to go look at where you find those and what some of the examples of them are. So I'm going to go to ZipForms here. So many advertisements on ZipForms now. So let's go to View Forms. I'm going to switch from the Wainwright Library of Forms to the Roanoke Valley Association of Realtors Library of Forms. I'm going to search for the purchase agreement. I'm going to bring that up. And now that I'm in here, I'm going to start filling out this purchase agreement. Now, I work for the buyer. The buyer is going to want to have the seller pay some of their closing costs for them. So I'm going to fill all this out. I'm going to get down here to additional deposit and financing terms. And I'm going to click into this additional terms section. And then I'm going to select this pencil that you see hovering above. And when I click that pencil, I'm going to click the clauses. So this little piece of parchment paper is going to take me to clauses. Do not stay in library. I don't know who wrote these. These are just ones that come with ZipForms. Click to broker. You want your broker, me. You want to use my clauses, okay? It's going to default to purchase agreement amendments just because that falls earlier in the alphabet when this list is alphabetized. We're going to go to purchase agreement. We want to look at the clauses that are available when writing a purchase agreement. I'm going to open up the clause title drop-down menu and look for one that has to do with closing costs. My options are septic location and pump out, and we're going to use that elsewhere, due diligence clause, conventional loan appraisal clause, septic location, 1031 exchange, as is with inspections, which is similar to a due diligence clause, personal property to convey, additional financing terms, and seller paid closing costs. I feel like I'm announcing the board on Jeopardy, but we're going to go with seller paid closing costs. So you see that this is already phrased for you. This contract is contingent upon sellers paying up to $4,000 in purchasers' points, prepaids, closing costs, inspections, survey, home warranty fees, and bank charges. And all I have to do is click insert. Then I'm going to go up here and I'm going to alter the $4,000 to be whatever it is we are actually going to be asking for. And I'm done. The problem is, and I'm going to explain this to you, please follow along with this because a lot of agents don't know this. If I simply say this contract is contingent upon sellers paying up to $5,500 in purchasers' closing costs, if we go to the standard provisions page of our purchase agreement, we're going to see at the bottom of that page a definition of what closing costs is. So that means if we had written it that way, they could only apply that $5,500 to attorney's fees, settlement agent fees, appraisal fees, and the rest of this list. It would not be able to be used for prepaid costs, discount points, or buy down points. So if you're simply writing in closing costs, you are strictly letting that apply to this first paragraph here. And you are limiting what that money can be used for. And you may be leaving money on the table, okay? So I'm going to spell it all out and say closing costs, prepaids costs, discount points, buy down points, and points, prepaids, survey, I'm going to add more items in there because I want to use up as much of that seller paid concession as I possibly can. Okay. Now let's go back up here and let's go to additional terms. Let's say this property has a septic system. Okay. So it has a septic system and I'm representing the buyer. So I am going to go again to the pencil, again to the piece of parchment paper or the piece of paper there. I'm going to click over to broker. I'm going to click to purchase agreement. And I know this is a lot of clicks. And then I'm going to go to septic location and pump out because and I could choose any of these in here, but I'm going to choose septic location and pump out. And this says seller and purchaser agree that this contract is contingent upon seller locating the septic tank and drain field at seller's sole expense prior to closing. Seller also agrees to have the septic system pumped prior to closing or provide a receipt of septic having been pumped in last 2 years. I'm going to click insert. And now, for the good or the bad, the seller will have agreed to locate that septic system. And if I can please put Jennifer on the spot, I would love for her to tell why we have this clause now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let you guys listen to Jennifer. Thank you, Jennifer.
Good morning, guys. So I have a bonus son for my husband's first marriage, and this actually happened on his house purchase down in Franklin County. And I always, when there's a septic tank, I always ask for the sellers to pump that septic tank. I did not do that when I purchased my house, and we moved in, and then on Thanksgiving I had to call and have my septic pumped. So lesson learned on myself that I always ask for that. Well, in order to do that, they had to find the septic tank at this house in Franklin County. They couldn't find it. So the owners bought the house as a foreclosure, and they had a very nice, I guess it was a patio, a covered patio built on the back of the house. And then it was a nice, pretty steep bank down to the lower level where the acreage is. So they looked and looked and looked and looked and looked, couldn't find it. They had never had the septic pump since they owned the house. Had no clue where it was. So the second set of people came out, and they had to actually run a camera through the toilet system and down, and saw that it did have a septic tank, yay. But what happened was when they built the patio area and the playhouse area that was out behind that, they brought in a bunch of fill dirt and backfilled a nice level area on the back of the house. But when they did that, they buried the septic tank about 6 to 8 foot under the ground. So if we had not had them locate that, put an extender, that sort of stuff on it, when there was an issue, we would have had to have excavated and brought in heavy equipment to find that septic tank. And all the while, the agent on the other side could not understand why I wanted that septic tank pumped. So it was definitely a learning experience for us. But, and I believe they used some type of a magnet or something from the camera to be able to pinpoint in the yard where the tank was, is how they ended up finding it. But it was pretty costly for them to do that. But we would have had no clue where it was.
And additionally, when Dustin went to sell the house later, I mean, that would have been his responsibility.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was a fun time, I tell you.
And I will say that listing agent was pitching a little fit throughout the entire, a large fit throughout the process, that he had been tricked into having to do this. There was no tricking. It was on the contract. You know, aren't we glad Jennifer wrote it in on the contract? Because you can imagine her own son isn't going to be angry at her. However, you know, any client would be rightfully upset had they moved into a house and found out that their septic tank was 6 feet further underground than it was supposed to be.
It's about 6 to 8 foot buried.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Yeah,
Okay, any
it was definitely interesting.
Questions about that, you guys? Thank you, Jennifer. Anybody? Anybody have a septic system horror story?
No, but I got a question though.
Please.
I just haven't dealt with that issue, like well water and septic tanks.
Mhm.
What does that means in general terms? I mean, I understand what it means, but what kind of complications or what are the disadvantages of it compared to having a public water and sewer than having well water and septic, you know?
Okay. Thank you, Deepak. That's an excellent question for us city dwellers who don't know what wells and septics are like. So for the well, there's going to most often be a well inspection. What they're searching for is they're making sure that the water is potable. They're making sure that there's not E. coli in the water, or there's another one, Jennifer, it's E. coli and, oh, I forget the other one.
Say bacteria.
Yes. Yeah. And if so, then they quote unquote shock the well. And that's where they go out, they apply chemicals, and they come back and test again and make sure that all the bacteria has been killed.
And honestly, it's like basically shocking a swimming pool.
Yeah. Yeah. What I'll also add is another concern for well, and we see this at the lake a lot, is when the water pressure is not great enough. So some of the lake agents are writing in language about how the water pressure, or the gallons per minute are a certain amount, because Virginia has sort of a low threshold on that of what's required. And so I will always encourage you that if there is a well in the home, like if the home is provided water by a well, before the home inspection, when you're touring the home, go turn on all of the faucets, run both showers at the same time, turn on the kitchen sink, make sure that that is going to be adequate water supply for your buyers, especially if these buyers have never had a well before. Now, if they've had a well before, they might say, that's fine, we don't care. However, I can tell you, I would not be satisfied going from public water to sort of a slower well supply. So that is definitely something to put on your checklist when you're touring properties that have a well. And then you're not going to be able to tell about whether the water is has bacteria or not. That's obviously a well inspection that's going to take place. But it's very clear then that the seller is responsible for shocking the well and making the water potable. So septic systems, it's a little more complicated. I will tell you, we've been involved in 2 lawsuits with septic systems. Neither went to court, thank heavens, because y'all know me. I work overtime to mediate and make sure everyone's happy and make sure everyone is satisfied with the outcome of bad situations. What's happening is we are actually, as brokers, the Brokers Council at RVAR is pushing to the board a request for the board of directors to send something to the Virginia Association of Realtors that we want a statewide registration, online registration of septic systems. What's very complicated about septic systems is their history. So when you look back 50 years, 75 years, 80 years to when septic systems were being permitted, they were being permitted in numerous ways. Obviously, nothing was electronic then. So the permit could be filed under the original owner's name. It could be filed under the developer's name. They were not filed under tax ID number because those didn't come along till later, or parcel ID numbers. They weren't filed in any sort of standardized way across the state of Virginia, or even across municipalities. So it has made it incredibly difficult for buyers, sellers, agents to be able to do a Freedom of Information Act request to receive a septic permit. And you'll hear other agents, because I'll tell you, when I was brand new, I got very frustrated when people would use jargon with me that I had no idea what it meant, and it made me feel stupid. I wasn't stupid. There's no reason why I should have known what a FOIA was, right? But a FOIA is a Freedom of Information Act request. Okay, so that's how you get a copy of the septic permit. You fill out one of those forms with the local health department. The health department is who is housing that information, and they may not have any information. Those permits may not be filed. Those permits may be lost. And unfortunately, our current MLS input sheet is requiring us to declare what type of septic system we have. Is it a 3-bedroom, a 4-bedroom, a 2-bedroom? Is it unknown or unavailable? Well, our arguments as brokers in Brokers Council is the Residential Property Disclosure Act in the state of Virginia is very clear. It even says it on the long form that sellers are not required to make any disclosures at all regarding septic systems. So we feel, the Brokers Council feels, that we are setting up our sellers for potential lawsuits by requiring us to put that information on the MLS sheet, and therefore requiring the seller to make some sort of declaration as to what type of septic system they have. Me personally, my vote, and I'm going to tell you this, I'm sitting on the MLS board of directors and the RVAR board of directors and on Brokers Council, and I am pushing this hard. I want our MLS input sheet to say septic, yes, no. Permit attached, yes, no. That's it. So you're just disclosing as the seller whether you have a septic system or not. The reason why it was done the way it was done is to unburden the buyer with some of that due diligence, right? But that's not the seller's job. In the state of Virginia, we are a buyer beware state. It is not our job as the seller to unburden the buyer with their due diligence obligations. And unfortunately, sellers don't know. I had a transaction last year where the listing agent, I was representing the buyer, the listing agent put 3-bedroom septic. We're Friday afternoon for a Monday closing, and I'm asking for the septic permit. The septic permit. And she's saying, oh, how do I pull that? And I said, I assumed you had it because you put 3-bedroom septic on the MLS input sheet. Oh, well, the other houses in the neighborhood have a 3-bedroom septic. Well, that is not the information to go on. And potentially that could have been fraudulent. And had we closed and we found out it was a 2-bedroom septic system, there could have been a lawsuit. So you want to be very careful about septic disclosures, okay? On the MLS, your options are unavailable and unknown for if you do not have the permit. It is a Realtor Code of Ethics violation to check one of those boxes incorrectly. So be very careful, please. The intention is that you put in a new listing on the MLS and you put it down as unknown, which means I, the listing agent, have not seen the permit. My seller doesn't have a copy, and I have not had the opportunity to go retrieve it yet. Unknown is supposed to be for just a small period of time until the permit has been received. And then the permit should be uploaded to the MLS under documents, and that should be changed to whatever the permit says. Now, I have a problem with that too, because I don't want you guys interpreting those septic permits as to whether they're a 3-bedroom or a 4-bedroom. I already have a problem with them being described as 3-bedroom and 4-bedroom. I think they should be described as what they are. 1,000 gallon, 1,500 gallon, 2,000 gallon. I don't make all the rules, unfortunately. So that's what we're stuck with. I just see all of this rife with potential lawsuits. So I understand that we're pushing that burden to the buyer and the buyer's agent, but at least they're not making any declarations about what it is unless and until they pull a permit. And if they don't like what they see, then I think buyer's agents need to be writing in there that that the contract is contingent upon successfully pulling a permit, identifying the property as having a 3+ bedroom septic system. And that's what we're going to have to see start happening. So I do think it's on the radar. I do think board of directors is going to move that to the state, to the Virginia Association of Realtors as a recommendation to say, we've got to get Virginia straightened out with this septic situation. Never, ever check unavailable under the septic field. Unavailable means you went to the health department, did a FOIA request, requested the permit, and they said no permit exists. That's what unavailable means. Now, if that really happened, then do check unavailable. But I'm going to tell you this, I want you to have an email from that health department saying we could not find the permit. You know why? Because I just explained to you how those things are filed. Well, the municipalities all across Virginia right now are reorganizing how they are filing those. And a permit they couldn't find a year ago, they may find now. They may be going through all of those files, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to cross-reference and put multiple points of information on them so that now you could look them up conceivably by owner name, parcel ID, and not just one way. Well, one that's been unavailable may all of a sudden be available, and you do not want to have nothing in writing showing that the health department didn't, you want the health department to say, we could not find the permit, okay? We've got some questions in the chat window. You guys might have some questions about this.
One thing to add though.
Obviously a little strident about my opinions of how the septic permits are done.
One thing to add, I have a listing, so be careful, especially in Roanoke City. I have a listing on Hearthstone that the GIS website shows public water, public sewer. My house is clearly on a septic. So do your due diligence. Don't just go by what they have listed. It happens a lot in Roanoke City in some of those older neighborhoods. And I think how it does happen, it kind of was explained to me, is that there is sewer hookup now, but she elected, I guess years ago, the homeowner elected not to hook to it, just to keep her septic. But it is showing in, and she pays higher taxes because they think she's on septic. But she is definitely, because they think she's on sewer, but she's definitely on septic. So don't just take that one source for the word, because she's like, no, Jennifer, I know it says that, but it definitely has a septic tank. I've had it pumped. So do a little bit of research, especially in the Roanoke City area. And then Deepak, the well situation, I love well water. If you haven't seen it, for the new agents, when you're out of the house, to know that it is on a well, usually there is a big blue bladder tank. So it is some extra maintenance involved from being hooked to municipality water versus a well. And there is also a well pump. So there is extra maintenance involved with the well, but it's great water usually. Ours is. I love it. It's so much better than the Salem water.
Jennifer, I even got her a Culligan system here at the office so she could have,
It is not my well water.
All right.
Anybody have any other questions about well and septic? Just call us too. Jennifer's obviously very knowledgeable about it. I am as well. Daniela's raised her hand. Yes, Daniela.
I do have a question. So if I'm a listing agent and I have a septic system and I have a buyer agent that comes along and is asking me about the septic system, would I go to the health department, or would you have the buyer agent go down to the health department, get the information?
Either one can. So
okay.
Presumably, if you've taken the listing, you've already started that process, because if you get a listing today, I want you calling the health department the same day or the next day saying, hey, need to start making a request to get a copy of the septic permit. Okay. And, but if you've already put in the request, then you can just let the buyer's agent know, I've already put in the request. I'm waiting to get it back. And that's when it should be listed in unknown status. Now, some sellers may have a copy of the old permit. Okay. And if you get a copy of the old permit, that's fine. But what I want you to do is upload it under documents on the MLS. That way the buyer's agent can see it. Additionally, I had something else right there on the tip of my brain, y'all, about septic. Oh, do not trust previous listings. So I've already said that, but in this case, I just had a situation where I had a listing that is not going on the MLS. Some past clients of mine who were getting their house ready for market had some friends come over and say, you know what, I think we want to buy your house. So it's not going on the MLS right away. I did do an MLS listing exclusion form and filed that with RVAR so that I can be in compliance, because if you're not putting your house on the MLS, there's a form that has to be filled out and signed by the sellers, and that has to be filed at RVAR. So I did do that, but the buyer's agent therefore did not have my listing to go by when filling out the contract. And he went by the previous listing from when they bought it, like 10 years ago. And it said it's a 4-bedroom septic system. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. We don't know. He did not write any special language into this contract that it has to be a certain size. So as far as I'm concerned, they're buying this house no matter what size that septic is. So I'm pulling the permit, but it's just taking a while. And we won't know until it gets here. Now, they could stamp their feet and say, well, we thought we were buying a 4-bedroom septic system, but that's not my old listing. They did not write anything into the contract stating that it must be a certain size. So I am prepared to fight that fight if need be. And Samantha has a question. The problem is if sewer is available and you need a new septic, the health department will not let you get it fixed.
You're correct. You're correct. But I don't think it's mandatory. Just like my folks, they do not, just because it's available, they did not have to do it because their septic is in functioning order. But I do believe you are correct on that, Sam.
I am. I went to the meeting.
Yes. Yeah. They want you to tie in, which is ridiculous. If you want to have a septic system, I mean, it's property rights, right? Yeah. But those municipalities, they're going to require you to tie in.
I think if you get a loan that they're going to make you tie in as well, if it's available.
I don't know about that one.
I think it's only if there's an issue with the septic.
Oh, okay. Good.
Yeah. Because we've not had a problem with this one.
How often those septic systems get cleaned out? Like, is it one, I guess it depends on the size, but still, people ask me that question and I'm like,
I'm going to answer that because it's going to depend on the septic system and how healthy it is. And I know that sounds crazy, but that is the explanation that I got. If you have a healthy septic system, which has the bacteria, you're not putting food waste in it, is how it was explained.
Yes, no garbage disposals. No garbage disposals on your septic.
Not on a septic. Then it has a happy little harmony life in there, and it does what it's supposed to do, breaking down everything, and it can go years. Other people have said maybe every 2 years you should have it pumped. Mine, that poor little thing.
You have an unhappy septic.
I have a very unhappy septic tank. And first off, it is not very deep. So mine is only under the ground, maybe 2 feet. So we're having some issues with ours. It's the old system. My house was built in 1935. And what we have found out is the lid to it was just a very thin piece of metal that has eroded. And anytime we have a heavy downpour of rain, it fills my septic tank up. So we're on the schedule to get that taken care of. We have to put a new cap on it and that sort of stuff. But a healthy system, you can go years without doing it. I know on Dustin's house, they had lived in that house 7 years and had never had the septic tank pumped.
But also, Deepak, that's a family of 3. My family of 7 may not have had the same experience.
Right.
All right,
and that's what happened in my house because we use a lot of water in my house. And
But Samantha says her house was built in 1954 and her septic system's still good.
Yeah.
I was here 20 years before I had it pumped.
Wow.
Gee.
Lucky duck. Okay, I also will tell you this. Another experience I had with septic systems recently is I have some clients who were wanting to buy out in Troutville, but one of their primary search criteria items was that they be able to put an in-ground pool in. So every time we'd go to a house and look at it and it had a septic system, I was asking the listing agent, where is the drain field? So the drain field will be a large area where the fluids are pumped out through this area to allow them to saturate and seep back down into the ground, okay? So you can't disturb that area. So obviously, if my folks wanted to put in an in-ground pool, we needed to know the location of that drain field, because if it was directly in the middle of the backyard, that would have prohibited where they wanted to put the pool. So we were looking at a particular property, and what was confusing is I knew it said septic on the MLS input sheet, on the MLS printout. However, I saw some municipality looking manhole covers in the backyard, and I was very curious about them. Now, the backyard went out level and then it went up because it was a couple of acres and it went up into some meadow. When I called and asked the listing agent about it, what it was a pump back system. So all of that municipal looking manhole covers and that type of equipment in the backyard was a system that is being used to pump all of the wastewater up the hill, because the drain field was up that hill. And so most of them are gravity fed drain fields. Like it just flows down to the drain field and then soaks back into the ground. However, at Smith Mountain Lake, you'll see a lot of these systems because the drain field has to go uphill. And if it has to go uphill, you have to get the water up there somehow. So the wastewater gets pumped by these systems up the hill. So we did not purchase the home because the drain field wasn't in the way, but all of the pipes going to the drain field and all of the mechanical equipment was in the way of them putting in an in-ground pool. So it was worth asking about that. And if there is a septic system, it is worth asking the location of it prior to writing the offer, because if your folks are going to want to put in a garage or a pool or a patio, then you may want to know that location because it may end up prohibiting where they can locate those. So that may make the decision for them before you even get under contract. Okay.
And there is another style septic as well. Remember the house on Forest, was it Forest Lawn?
Oh, yes.
That they were very close to a creek. So basically they had a very expensive system installed, and it did require an annual maintenance. So that's something to be aware of. It would definitely be something that you would notice because there was a lot of equipment on the outside of the house. There was alarms, all kinds of things out there. But basically from toilet to septic to the end of the system, you had clean water. Mm-hmm. And they made them do that because of being so close to the creek. They didn't want to contaminate anybody else's water. So it's a very expensive system, but they assured me that it goes from yuck to drinkable water by the time it goes out the other end of the system.
That's right.
So that's something to be aware about too. But I mean, that is a very big system that you would definitely be able to know. I mean, that would be something they
Yes. And it would raise, just look around, you know, that's how it came to my attention that it was a pump up system or pump back system, because I saw mechanical equipment I'm not used to seeing.
And those systems are expensive to install too.
They are.
So regular homeowners just fuss about putting them in. They're a really great system. Builders are doing it now just because they're doing the cost of it or whatever. But I mean, it is a very good system. There is an alarm system in place in case the pump goes out so that there's not backups into your home and things like that. I've sold several that have had that system, and it's exactly what it is. It's when it's not a level drain field, in order to distribute it all out evenly, it literally just pushes it to the end. And they say it's really good because it shoots it all the way to the other end. So the life of the drain field is much longer because you're using the entire thing, where a gravity fed, a lot of times it's just the beginning of the drain field.
That's interesting.
Used.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Carla wanted to know how long septic systems last, and I don't really have that answer. I don't really know.
Anecdotally, you hear all the time that as long as they're being properly maintained, they'll last decades and decades. A lot of times they get upgraded because people finish off a basement or they add on an addition. They weren't really doing a lot of 4-bedroom septic tanks back in the day, so our usage obviously is greater now than it ever has been, with washing machines running 3 times a day if you live in my house, and just all the extra water usage that we're using now. We're using a lot more water than ever before.
That was our first purchase because our septic tank was a 2-bedroom septic, and we washed way too many clothes.
Yep.
But tree roots is another thing to take into consideration with the septics and where the drain fields are. We had a huge oak tree, 100-year-old plus oak tree in our front yard. And the roots do get into the drain areas because of the water, and they do cause some issues. And a lot of the old systems have the clay lines. And over years, that can crumble, especially with tree roots helping that out. But I mean, they can last forever, really.
Question.
I got a question.
Let's go Deepak first, then I'll get to you, Carla.
Okay, I know y'all talking about drain fields and stuff. Like, obviously, I have no idea about. So the septic tanks, so the wastage goes into the septic tank, and then I guess the water that goes through it, it goes out of the septic tank to a drain field by itself. Is that how that works?
That's correct. The solids settle, and
Okay.
bacteria, good bacteria in the tank, works at chomping away at all of that and keeping it under control. So the solids sink, and then the liquids flow out and usually are gravity fed down to a drain field through a series of, I mean, are they pipes?
Yes. So there's a distribution box, and I only know this because we're dealing with it with our septic. So you have the tank, which is usually 1,000, 2,000 gallon, and that's where your solids are going to settle. Your bacteria is going to take care of that. And just a note, Scott toilet paper. I know Ashley does not like Scott toilet paper, but that's the best for your septic system because it breaks down really good.
I'm a city girl and I'm spoiled. I like nice fluffy toilet paper. Thank you.
Doesn't work good with a septic tank. But anyway, there's a distribution box that the liquids go to this box. And then depending on the size of the septic tank that you have, the system that you have is how many of the pipes that go off to distribute the water. So smaller systems will have 2 to 3. You can have 4 to 5. It just depends on how big of a system that you have in the house. So the liquids from the tank goes down the distribution lines and out into the yard.
Perfect. Okay, so last thing I'll say is when you're filling out that residential septic system,
You got to go back to Carla.
oh, I got to go to Carla. Carla, thank you.
Can I just tell y'all my whole mind is blown by the fact that waste is just pushed out into the yard? Like, I don't know where I've been.
Well, it goes in a tank. It's in a tank. The poo's in a tank.
That's right. Solids stay in the tank.
Until they're
Liquids
liquid
go
enough.
out into the yard. Yes, they do.
That's so
Yes, they do.
crazy to me. Like, that doesn't seem healthy.
Just wear your shoes.
Good answer. Good answer.
But
Okay.
fortunately, they're not going to the top of the ground. They're going into the ground and then sinking further. So
If it's on top of the ground, you have a problem.
yes, and then Mother Earth just does her job, you know, filtering all of that as it goes back into the water table. Yep.
Okay.
Although,
All
if you're like me, it just never occurred to you. I mean, you knew it had to be going somewhere. You just had no idea where.
So if you pay
Think
attention
about
to,
it.
Carla, usually the well is in the backyard and the septic's in the front, or vice versa. Like your well can't be very
Okay.
close to the septic for that
Obviously, yeah, that would be
Okay.
bad.
That
Bad.
makes sense. Okay.
Yes.
So here's my question, because I'm telling you I didn't know this stuff. If I understood you, what you're saying is that the responsibility for identifying the permit stuff is on the listing agent from the beginning. So if we're listing that property, you want us to take steps to identify, or because I'm trying to figure out how to get out of that. That's the
You
end
do
of my
not
question.
have to do it. It is
Okay.
not a seller required disclosure.
Okay.
So,
So we can put the unavailable.
no,
Or the
Unavailable.
unknown.
unavailable. You want to put unknown, and I have been a
Okay.
huge proponent of those two words. Sound way too similar.
Yeah, they do.
They do.
Okay. So I can
So-
put unknown and then put that little verbiage in there about all that stuff's on the responsibility of the agent and the
Yes.
buyer.
I would say a very good practice would be to check unknown, and in the private remarks say seller and listing agent are asking the buyer to request the septic system permit, right? Just let them know you're putting that on them, because truly we are not doing our best by our seller when we require them to disclose that, because they're not required to disclose it. So hopefully the standard form will get changed very quickly. It's been thumbs up from everybody. The only complaint we've been hearing is it just puts one more thing on the buyer. Well, too bad. Everything's on the buyer. We're a buyer beware state. So I would say if you do have the permit, if you want to pull the permit, then I don't think there's any harm in doing that. It is literally public record. So if you want to do that, just as
See,
a,
actually, I've done it before with Franklin County, and it's a nightmare. And they don't give it to you over the phone. They don't email it to you. I had to go down there,
correct.
trace back the original owner. I mean, it was crazy.
It is.
And I want to say there was a small fee, whatever it was, maybe $10, $12, something like that. But and you know, and I had to drive because my sellers had then moved on to Lexington. So
That's right.
it was crazy. Anyway, I prefer not to.
You know, I do see this changing, maybe not fast enough for my liking, but it is changing. So and this is part of the reason why I step up at RVAR and I serve on committees and I serve on boards. I want to help tailor our industry to be most protective of our sellers, our buyers, and us. You know, I don't want to watch the agents accidentally make themselves vulnerable or accidentally create a code of ethics violation just because the form makes them think they have to go find that permit, right? So hopefully the form will be changed soon. I will say the residential septic system disclosure form is still a required seller form, but all it discloses is whether the seller does or does not have a non-conforming septic system. Your seller is going to know if they do not have a conforming septic system because the health department will have tagged it as non-conforming and be asking them for some sort of remedy or you know, asking them to fix it. So most of the time, 99% of the septic system disclosure forms we see come through here say they have not been issued a waiver. So a waiver is the health department saying that's a jacked up septic system. You've got this amount of time to get it fixed. Okay. We are out of time, guys. I didn't even get to my get business quick idea. However, I will tell you, it was going to be door knocking. Why you want to go around and do some door knocking. I prefer to go around and do door knocking when I have a new listing. That way I have sort of a reason to be on their front stoop. And I'm just, I'm sorry?
Where do you get them?
So these door knocker little hanger things, lots of companies sell them. These happen to be from Prospects Plus, and they have a little tear off business card portion. Also, I actually, a couple of weeks ago when I shared with you guys that I had learned how to use the prospecting tool on CRS tax data to get an address list to go into Prospects Plus and send out my postcards. Here's my postcard. So I got a copy. Here's my postcard that I sent out to 686 residents of Salem about this listing in Salem. I had used the CRS tax data's prospecting tool to narrow down my address list to people who lived in Salem who had owned their house for more than 5 years, whose current home was valued at $250,000 to $450,000, because I thought those were the people most likely to upgrade to my $529,000 listing. Now, because I made this postcard with them, I made an account with Prospects Plus, and they sent me a 2020 marketing planner. So I talked to them and they said that if you just sign up with them, you don't even have to buy anything. They will send you this marketing planner. So it really is just a month by month journal for you to be able to write in here what type of marketing strategies you're going to be using in your business. So totally free. They sent that to me with a package of just some of their samples, a sample package. And it is a pretty cool marketing planner. So it's Prospects Plus. I'll put the address in the chat window if you're just interested in getting a little free swag. So anybody have any questions, anything they want to share? If you have to go, I totally get it. We've just run over on time. Anybody? Anything?